That was fantastic. We're very lucky to have Representative Schweikert, Representative Polis on the Blockchain Caucus, representing a lot of the interests of this industry. Speaking firsthand, being in probably 20 members of Congress offices over the last few years, there's folks that get it. Clearly, these two gentlemen get it. And then, you kind of go in these offices and you say, the beauty of Bitcoin and this underlying railroad of blockchain, and you really talk about, how this is going to change every industry, et cetera. And you kind of go through this, and then at the end of the meeting, the member would be like, well, what do you want? It's like, no, we want nothing. We just want you to know this is coming down the path here. And we're dealing with a new element, a new medium here that's literally going to light up every agency, every part of the zip code of DC, because we're dealing with money, digital identity, and lots of different fabrics of movement, of value, and data. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to play out. And we need strong advocates like we saw here today. Up next, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, our first keynote speaker of the day, David Treat from Accenture. David's had a long career in consulting, a strategist in financial services. David runs the blockchain effort at Accenture, one of the largest IT consulting firms on the planet. And I'm a big believer in actions speak louder than words. And David's a man of action. He is a contributor and member of Hyperledger, of the Ethereum Enterprise Ethereum Association, and is also the thought leader and the sponsor of the title sponsorship here of the Chamber, which we're very thankful for. And pleasure to introduce David.
So before I try to convince you I haven't lost my mind by playing this video, I just reflect a little bit on what we heard in the panel just now. Yesterday, I think, Matt, I love that you polled the audience to get the different perspectives that we have in the room, because the thing that I get asked most often in media interviews, and I think a lot of the questions that we heard yesterday and we heard just now, this notion of where are we? What's the state of this technology? What are the challenges that we have to address to be able to take it into, make it reality, make it real, take it into production? What are those regulatory and policy and funding and the whole notion of, as I think it was Representative Schweikert said, those that stand to potentially have the value that they create today changed and disturbed and all of these questions. One of the things that's missing for me is we've got these questions, this understanding of the current state of play, and then in the room, those of us that raised our hands around our excitement and vision for what we're building with this technology, what it can do. Charles's talk, where'd he go? Charles left, on the financial inclusion. The gap between those two of all the questions, enormous, fantastic vision as to where we need to be. There's a gap for me around understanding the state of play of where we are today and helping to articulate that. So I have two goals for this morning. One is, I'll explain the video, and share a perspective on where we are at the state of play within blockchain technology. And then the second is introduce a piece of work that we have launched and an invitation actually to all of you to join with us in creating a frame of reference by which we can articulate the state of play for blockchain technology. Because through that articulation and having a clear understanding of what has been developed already, that gap to the vision for what we all think and hope and things we haven't even thought of yet as to what it could achieve, if we're able to articulate that, it will help enormously. So let me try to explain my insanity. So this is 1954. These two gentlemen are looking at the field as they started plowing the ground to build the CERN facility. And at that point in time, the compute power they were able to calculate as to the data that was going to come off of those first collisions, based on the compute power of the day, it was going to take 13.2 billion years to analyze one experiment. But they still broke ground. At that point it was 12 nations got together as the initial consortium. You're going to start to hear some familiar words. Consortium got together and said, we're going to do this. The idea was in 1949, broke ground in 1954. In 1959, they had the first synchrotron load up. Fast forward, another dozen years. The first proton collisions, at that point, the technology of the time, it was going to take 65 million years, based on the compute power, to analyze that first reaction, and yet they still went forward. By this time, or roughly this time, I'm going to get some of my facts wrong, so apologize to the CERN team, up to 22 nations. The consortium has now grown. The ground that they broke split between Switzerland and France. We had it crossing a boundary and a border. In 1988, they built the tunnel for the first, the piece in the video that you saw where they pre-accelerate the protons. 3.2 million years. 1997, 11,000 years. 2006, still at 35 years to analyze the data that was going to come off of this and the billions of dollars that were being invested in constructing what is the world's largest machine. And then 2015, when they 2012 was the Nobel Prize and the discovery, 2015, the announcement of pentaquarks, they got it down to 1 year. And that was massive success. But through this entire journey, it was never about what can the technology do today. It was, we've got a vision for what we're trying to discover and create and solve. The technology will get there. It's an innovation, it's a design, it's a configuration problem. Let's not be encumbered by what the technology can do today. There's an alternative story. It's not so good for us. So here in the US, we tried to build the superconducting super collider I'm going to tell this story very shortly as a different kind of lesson. This was a single nation's effort. This is the hole that they dug in Texas to start to build what was going to be something 3 times the size of what was done in CERN. For a variety of reasons, in terms of single people going it alone, jumping straight to a massive answer and not iterating to it, funding challenges. There's a whole long story you can read up on. That facility is now a chemical blending plant. In 2012, they filled that hole with water for a decade, and it's now being productively used as a chemical blending plant. That effort failed. So just lessons from CERN, and I had the good fortune last fall during Sibos to go tour the facility with actually Rob Plotnick from the DTC is here. Rob and I went, John Lee from TMX. A few of us went and toured, and I came away from that experience and this backstory to this wonderful success of being able to, these physicists cross country to accomplish what they have. I was struck by the unconstrained nature of how they pressed forward, that they had a vision and they weren't going to be encumbered by the questions of, well, what's your throughput today? What's your scale? What you can't do with today's technology. It was that vision of, we'll figure that out. Let's be unconstrained in our visions. It was enormously collaborative. So 22 countries getting together, starting really post-World War II, 11 countries in Europe getting together. That was not necessarily a conducive environment to collaboration and cooperation, but they did it. It was open. So they were doing things, they were creating things. Dr. Connor referenced it yesterday, right? The difference between the internet and the World Wide Web. This is where the World Wide Web was built, donated. There was a completely open environment in which this technology and science thrived. And they iterated. So I hope from the video you got a glimpse of, they didn't jump straight to the end. They knew they had to iterate. They were building along the way. And talent focused. Again, it took a special group to get together. It took the collaboration and cooperation of a wide talent base. I see this journey as being directly analogous to the one that we're on with blockchain. The vision for what we're trying to achieve, the comments earlier around whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial inclusion, there are real things that will actually change the way the world works and lives that's going to be driven from this fundamental technology of being able to let go of a messaging-based business model where I can't trust your data and you can't trust mine. So we've got to send data back and forth with each other and agree a view of the world to get anything done. Instead, the ability to share access to data. I see these two journeys as being enormously similar. So where are we now? I don't think we're at the groundbreaking. I don't think we're actually at the at the initial experiment. I think we're at this tipping point where we're actually really going from experiment into reality. And I think we've heard a few examples yesterday. I think we're going to hear more examples today. We're working on things. There are lots of announcements. Perianne just made a few of them, where real things are starting to happen. I think to Matt's point, though, I also don't think that we know everything that's going to evolve from this. I think it's going to be massively transformational. The hype curve, right? So you said there's a lot of hype ahead of us. I got my stomach twisted when I saw when Gartner produced this, and I found the blockchain word on it because they'd revised it. I hate the fact that we're still nearing the top of the hype curve because we have that trough of disillusionment ahead of us, and we can't ever seem to avoid this with new innovation. So we've got a bit of a rough patch ahead, and we could argue this chart, in several different ways. But I think for me, I think there are pockets of us that are past that, are starting to ascend it. It's about how do we get the rest of us there. Again, going back to this point that my second goal of a frame of reference of understanding where we are. So when I think at the most broad levels as to where in fact we are, I'm really encouraged for these 5 reasons. We've got large corporate and enterprises engaged in driving innovation in ways that we never have before. I've spent the last 20 plus years in financial services, more than half of that in capital markets. If you told me that we were going to get, the likes of, J.P. Morgan and Citi and Bank of America and BNY Mellon, we're going to get these large financial institutions together in a room collaborating on anything, it's enormously different today than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, where innovation is coming from these enterprises and corporates, and they're collaborating. We've got a flourishing startup community. So we're in this massive, explosive phase of lots of startups, fantastic innovation. It's where the thinking and the ideas are coming from and driving the innovation as well. We've got the large tech companies, so us, IBM, Microsoft, Intel, again, contributing our pieces to what's going to be required to bring this all into a production environment, and the full spectrum of technology that's going to be required for much of what we envision. And then, very apropos for today, in the conversation that we just listened to, the engagement at the government and regulatory perspective is now, I think, hitting a pace. And we're seeing the importance of it. We're seeing the caucus, and that aspiration of doubling in the next year, I think, is brilliant, right? And we're seeing this globally of the governmental and regulatory engagement on this topic, and what the important dialogues are going to be necessary to be able to, again, bring this into reality. And then the consortia, as a broad topic, two kinds of consortia, and again, Matt alluded to this. There's the technology consortia that are building the underlying platforms or operating systems, so that Hyperledger, EEA, in some respects, Corda. And then there are the domain-specific consortia that are now emerging. So Matt mentioned B3I, a few others that are coming out now, where really these use cases are coming to life, and the collaboration between the parties involved in the business ecosystem are getting together and realizing, to the point that was made earlier this morning, they don't have to worry about the destruction of their existing value chain. That actually we can leap past that, and there's going to be ways to make money. There's going to be ways to be productive and relevant through the use of this technology. And Marty said it right? It's do well and do good, I think is all going to be a driving force as to how this moves forward. So I'm a financial services guy, so let me just, again, painting the picture of the state of play. Financial services was complicated before this started, right? It's been complicated for a long, long time. I love this chart from William Mugyar. We've blanked it out just for effect, right? So complicated financial services, and when you map into it, the plethora, the explosion of companies that are blockchain focused on that ecosystem is dizzying, right? How possibly can you regulate, think about the laws, think about the standards, think about the dots that need to get connected when you have this many players thinking about it. Now, so on one hand, this is fantastic. This plethora, this explosion of companies thinking and working about blockchain and its possibilities and the vision is fantastic and driving the innovation, and the complexity is tough. We have to sort through that. And so this obviously doesn't only apply to financial services. We've heard about health, supply chain, transportation, digital rights, government, identity. All of these is critical domains where this is now, cross-industry. It's within each of these industries, and then the most fun I'm having these days is when we have the cross-industry use cases. We could talk more about that over coffee after this. So, how do we measure our progress? How is it that we're able to be smart about regulation, smart about policies, smart about standards, smart about making the right connections, if we don't really have a great grasp on where we are today in aggregate? So I'm not talking about any one individual company's progress, but in aggregate, let's just show hands. Who feels as though they've got a handle on the state of play of blockchain as a domain, full stop? Andrew? Yeah, no, there's a few of you who I expect to raise the hands. Like, where's Brian? Brian should have raised his hand. Maybe he's not in the room. There's a small number of folks, I think, that probably could legitimately give a great overview of the state of play. But the lack of the rest of us raising our hands, is our point. And our invitation and the work that we're working on right now is we're creating a framework to understand where we are as a means to help clarify that agenda, inspire innovation, frankly, and help to drive us between that gap of the current state and the vision. So what is it? So what we are doing through our Accenture Technology Labs, we invite in, and we've got our strategic alliance partners, and then anyone in the blockchain space, we invite in to engage with our labs, and we take them through a bit of a process. So we have a classification framework that we've started that I guarantee you is wrong, but it's a start, and we're looking for people to help us with it. The classification framework says, let's start to understand not all of these things are the same, right? There are things that you would argue more at the operating system level, things that are more at the middleware level, things that are very focused on business applications, some things that cut across, some things that are focused just on the ledger side of things, some that are thinking more about incorporating the business logic into smart contracts and going at the processing end of that suite. And so we've got a classification framework that we know is wrong, but is a start. And we would, again, this is an open invitation to work with us to make it right. What we do then is we've got a whole a set of processes and procedures now to do performance testing. So if we can start to articulate what it is, and then we can set the functional and non-functional metrics around what important parts of performance are relevant as we want to understand this technology. So throughput, scale, confidentiality, et cetera. What are those metrics? How do we measure them? How do we measure them objectively? So when we're in one domain and talking about it, the needs, how do we compare them objectively to the suite of available tool sets? And how do we understand it differently in a different domain? So the needs and requirements of healthcare are going to be fundamentally different than capital markets, and there'll be a Venn diagram of overlap of some of it. We then have an approach by which we analyze that performance, those functional capabilities. It all has to be contextually relevant, right? So it's putting it in the context of the use cases, the business domains that whoever's building is building towards, and then. This is not about any one individual company's abilities. This is about this end state of an aggregate view where we collectively can say, this is the state of blockchain technology. As everyone's making individual progress, where are we overall in aggregate? And then what does that mean in terms of what the priorities should be for the next phase? So we put in up abstract images just to help convey the messages. There's actually real stuff behind it. We would love to, again, as I said, we are inviting everyone in to work with us on this. This is a concept that has come up in all of the consortium. It's a concept that has come up with many of our client conversations, many of our alliance partner conversations. We want to open up this to be a broad dialogue to say we will all be better off if we have a frame of reference to understand how this technology is developing. We offer this out. We look forward to working with you on it. We think this is a critical step to help guide how we turn this fully from experiment into reality.
What URL we go to for more info?
Elisa will distribute that shortly. I'm happy to take a couple questions. How am I doing time-wise? I've got 5 minutes? Okay, so we can take a few questions. Yeah, so we will publish through this website the means to engage, how we engage. And if there are no questions, we'll make up some time.
Individuals or counties, county governments, like county, be involved?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is the value of this framework is, this framework will be most valuable if it has the more perspectives and that get fed into it. So, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Where does Accenture stand on the private versus public blockchain?
So I would, if you allow me, I'm going to tweak the question a little bit. I think if we talk about where innovation is happening, there's been an enormous amount of innovation and a source of this innovation that has come out of the permissionless public, fully permissionless public space, and that couldn't be more valuable. As it pertains to where we focus our work and what we're doing, we obviously, for who we are as a company, we focus on corporates and enterprises. And so we bridge we're working to bridge this fantastic source of innovation and thinking and making it relevant and useful within a corporate and enterprise domain. That's actually part and parcel of the charters of Linux Hyperledger and Enterprise Ethereum very consistently to do that. So I value them both enormously.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Holt from Transcendix. I moderated the session yesterday at the end of the Codeathon for lessons learned. And one of the things we discussed was, Greg Shannon was there. He previously was at the White House for cybersecurity. And at the NIST meeting, he actually made the important point of trust and trust shifting as the blockchain that facilitates that trust. But his point was really, it's not about trust, it's about confidence. And what we need to do is actually have a framework for measuring confidence. Yep. Very much like in science, we actually do confidence intervals. So any thought about that, about creating a framework on measuring confidence?
If I understand it correctly, it's a brilliant topic, and when I give my blockchain 101 speech of what it is, actually that's the beginning thesis is the movement away from messaging-based business models and the state that we've been stuck in for the past 60 years since databases were invented was on that premise. I can't trust your data and you can't trust mine. Your database administrator might have changed something. My business process might run differently than you would expect. A hacker could have broken into either of our sets of data. So we can't trust each other. We couldn't possibly have confidence in being able to point our important systems to your data, right? And so I buy into that. Couldn't believe in that concept more. Part of the goal of this framework is to articulate what are the characteristics and the important salient features of blockchain that do create that degree of confidence to be able to share access to data? And it's, at the end of the day, right, it's the provenance of the data, it's the tamper-evident nature of it, and it's the granular level access control. To be able to go at it, go at data element by data element. For me, putting those three pieces together, talking about the robustness of how all three of those plus a few others work is at the heart of it. And if we do this right, that confidence factor should emerge from this.
So I'm a physician in healthcare, the healthcare space for blockchain. And I'm a geneticist by training, actually. And so what we actually, in genetics, is LDTs, laboratory developed tests for the FDA. So trying not to get everything pushed through the FDA for authorization. There's actually something called CLIA for certifying labs, and that requires a board specialty to the lab needs to be directed by someone who's board certified. And so that when you attest to the authenticity of, I've mixed these reagents together in my lab, and I've been able to interpret them with my expertise. There's a new specialty in medicine, is actually called clinical informatics specialty. So in the health IT world, we're actually trying to create that knowledge domain so that there's no one EHR system that's actually going to be blessed by the FDA or HIT for the ONC. It's really going to be these domain experts who, my reputation is actually on the line, and I actually understand the complexity of how this system is going to be plugged into my health, my EHR or my hospital. So I think, is there a role for certified credentials of enabling confidence, that the 3 points you made, that I as an expert can actually then attest and be the point person that I've ran these analytics on my system, and I'm willing to take that onus on me to actually say that I personally have actually attested to this, the confidence. There's a follow-up question.
Yes, so that's awesome. I love those kinds of efforts, and we've got a number where we're working with folks like that, where, you know, instead of jumping to how this fits within current laws and you know, and the like, and trying to make it work in a particular set of rules, create the capability first, right? So if there's a blockchain-based system where you were able to, you know, take a reasonable view, you know, I'm trying not to use the word confidence, but to be able to attest to your identity, attest to the data that you put into it, have the system open and available for anyone to evaluate and be able to prove to themselves mathematically that no one's tampered with it, and can trace it back to its origin as to when you put it there and who you are, and the more we can make that robust, running that experiment and developing that capability, it couldn't be more important to just move further, faster, quickly, and then let's figure out, once that proving that that's very useful, then figure out how does that fit into the overall framework, and work on the approvals and do it in parallel. But you know, it's a fantastic use case.
I have a question.
No problem. I can hear you.
I guess, you know, you mentioned it, and the other questioner mentioned it. There are a number of countries that are making as much progress or more progress than the United States, and at least one thing they all seem to have in common is digital identity. Mm-hmm. What are and I probably would have liked to have asked our regulators or from the official sector in the previous panel, but what do you think the odds are of a common digital identity in the United States?
Yeah, I can't comment on the odds of a single common identifier. I think it's, for all the reasons you asked the question, right, of the challenges of putting that together. I would go at it slightly differently, actually, and going back to this notion of how innovation is happening. We have multiple clients that we're working with. I know that others are very active in this space. I think Hector talked about it yesterday from a Microsoft perspective. I think what we're going to see is you know, as a next major focus, I think we're going to see lots of identity solutions emerge. We're going to see enormous innovation in how identity works. I am trying not to, trying not to share something I'm not supposed to share yet. So there's enormous innovation that's focused on that. And what I think we're going to see is lots of them form. Then there'll be a bit of a consolidation. And when, you know, again, once successful, I think it'll be then very much easier to think through how is that then appropriately applied across domains within business ecosystems, in a regulatory construct, in a policy and rule construct. You know, I think it has to get built first, prove that it works, and then figure out how does it fit within that within the laws and regulations. Frankly, that's how I think it will happen. All right, I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Look forward to working with all of you.